got a letter, any type of communication, it was most likely from her. Okay. And so we're going to start our panel, and I will start ladies first. We have Ms. Lisa Guardiola. She is the Vice President of the National Association of Mental Illness, National Alliance of Mental Illness, South Suburbs of Chicago, NAMI. And then I'm going to jump over to my far left, and we have Dr. Leo Polizotti. He is a licensed psychologist, a licensed police psychologist, and the director of the Direct Decision Institute in Worcester, Massachusetts. He works with approximately 40 police departments and 15 fire departments, conducting pre-employment psychological screenings, fitness of duty evaluations, psychological testing for promotional candidates, anger management programs, academy training, stress program training and development, as well as psychotherapy. He serves as a training consultant and subject matter expert to the Municipal Police Institute and the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association. He also writes a monthly article for the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police newsletter on police psychology topics.
I didn't know I did all that.
All right. And then next to him we have Dr. Michael Sefton. Michael Sefton is a retired police sergeant who has provided consultation to police departments and first responders in New England at the Direct Decision Institute in Massachusetts. He is a licensed psychologist with expertise in risk assessment, aftermath intervention, and stress and resilience. Dr. Sefton is a co-author of a Police Chief's Guide to Mental Health Emergencies and has utilized psychological autopsies following suicides. His work with LEO's law enforcement officers utilizes a peak performance biofeedback protocol designed to reduce the impact of acute stress reaction and decrease the debility associated with the cumulative stress of trauma in order to build resilience on the job. Dr. Sefton. And of course, from earlier this morning, we have Mark DeBona, a patrol sergeant with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office and Police Academy instructor. Mark has an extensive law enforcement career and has held various positions and assignments. He is dedicated to advocating for the elimination of stigma concerning mental health issues, prevention of suicide and self-harm. He is a board member and public information officer for Blue Help. He is also a member of the Italian American Police Officer Society. Mark DeBona. And of course, we all just got to enjoy to hear Dr. Thomas Joyner break down and explain to us why it is that people die by suicide. Looking forward to hearing more. Dr. Joyner is a licensed psychologist and leading expert on suicide. He is the Robert O. Lilton Professor of Psychology at Florida State University, where he operates his laboratory for the study of psychology and neurobiology of mood disorders, suicide, and related conditions. He is author of Why People Die by Suicide and Myths About Suicide, and is a current editor-in-chief of Suicide and Life-Threatening Behavior, and he is the one who taught me the science of helping others, Dr. Thomas Joyner. And so we'll go ahead and start this panel. So now we have the opportunity to ask questions. We're going to keep it free-flowing. So this is your time to ask any of the speakers any questions that you want to hear. And of course, there will be more this afternoon for you to hear from Dr. Polizotti and Dr. Sefton, as well as NAMI. So any questions? We want to open it up. Comments, concerns? Yes, I see a hand.
Yes, hi.
Microphone in the back.
So regarding just police officer suicides, so we handle so many suicides ourselves, and we see sometimes it's very messy, and it obviously bothers you. So when a police officer decides to take their life, what state are they in beside the obvious of behavioral care, that they do so in such a harsh manner where they know their coworkers are going to have to be picking up pieces? Where are they at that point? What signs did I guess we miss?
Anybody want to take that question? Dr. Sefton?
It's not an easy answer. There's no single particular event that triggers something like that. It's more the cumulative effects of that. I remember a call where the guy hung himself in his garage, left the garage door open, the buses were dropping the children off. It's really a fuck you to the neighborhood. And he just overly traumatized. The problem is that there's such a camaraderie among the law enforcement. By the time he gets to that point, yeah, seeing suicide over and over again certainly does bring up your uncertainty about how efficacious you might be on the job, but it doesn't necessarily trigger your own suicide attempt or suicidality. And the camaraderie, there has to be some way to take away some of the stigma associated with seeking help for those kinds of experiences. Something you can't unsee if you're talking about seeing the remains of people. We were talking during the just amongst ourselves when he showed us that train video. Mark had worked for the Amtrak police, and we had a train tracks going through our town, and a buddy of mine had a call that just traumatized him. A guy was sitting, next to the train tracks, smoking cigarette after cigarette after cigarette. There was a big pile of them on the ground afterwards, and then he knew when the train was coming, and at some point got out of his truck and laid in the tracks. It really traumatizes not only the people that have to come, but the the guys that are driving the trains in Boston. They'll jump in front of the subway trains and so forth. People just don't realize. So what are the underpinnings of that? It's tough. It really is difficult.
I had a funny situation recently where the guts were spread out over the road, right in the city. So the recon people were picking up arms and legs, and the part that bothered them the most is when two foxes ran out from somebody's backyard and came out and started grabbing the person's intestines and stuff off the street, and they're trying to kill the fox. They said that bothered them more than just seeing the blood and guts. But that exposure, or whatever it is, whether it's something bizarre like that or just, it takes its toll. I mean, it's the way it is.
Just to let you know, I think this is one of the more interactive and important parts of today, and so I want to go ahead and let us have that full hour, if that's all right.
I wanted to just step back for a moment, just because we're seeing such a phenomenon here in Chicago, and ask, this may not be a question to go into deep detail, but how are police suicides handled as far as police investigations? Not so much as it being a homicide or a suicide, although sometimes when it's finished in one day, the implication to me is not necessarily that it's not a suicide, but how thoroughly are we researching and trying to plummet these cases? I follow this a lot in Chicago, and the suicide is at 4:00 p.m. and in the morning it's in the paper. Is it over as far as you guys are done, one? And two, I guess the bigger question is what kind of level of research or thinking or work has gone into this notion of suicide in terms of investigation? Because sometimes when we have larger investigation, we learn things. So I'm not just talking about research, but I'm just talking about even in general with the police process. Am I dead? It's over. Do you wonder what happened to me? What was depressing me? Do we go back to the commanders and follow my behavior, see how it's impacting? I'm just thinking of, along those questions.
I never thought about it. That's interesting. I don't think there's much, at least where I am. People, they'll do some background investigation of what happened. Oh yeah, he drove home. I guess the last one I can think of is left my office, a police chief who had been out of work for a while, and there was an argument about monies and stuff. He was working as an oil truck driver to make money to pay for his ex-wife's, his kids, support, child support, and he had a second wife, and the financial issues, whatever. So I hadn't seen him off and on. He was doing well. Came into my office, sounded great, was laughing, and things are going good, and finally things are working out, and the whole situation with the city is going to change. I'm going to get the money and so forth. He left my office, killed himself that evening. And what they found is that driving home, he got a phone call saying something about the child support. There was a problem. He wouldn't be able to help the kids because he wouldn't have the money and so forth. He already had a tank of, is it nitric oxide? Whatever the bad one is. Not the one that makes you laugh. That he had bought a month previous, and it was in his basement. His wife said, I went to bed at 11 o'clock, good night, I'll see you tomorrow, Tom. He says, yeah, we're okay. And then, boom, and he was dead. Now, the only investigation I know about was they talked to the wife, what happened, they talked to me, I said, well, that's what happened, whatever else. And everybody kind of said, gee, poor Tom, it's too bad he was under the gun, and that was the end of the conversation. So my experience has been, that's about the extent. They don't do much beyond just, they don't really dig into it. He's gone, he's in bad shape, and so forth.
The families will tell you of victims, officers that commit suicide, that there is none. That it's a shame. That it's besmirched the department's reputation. It's something that you don't look at. It's something you don't talk about. But what they frequently do is they'll look at all the frequency and the high acuity and high lethality calls that he's had over the last couple of months. Try to attribute it to some meaningful, identifiable trauma that's been he's been exposed to. They'll look at his reviews, the last couple years worth of employment reviews and so forth, as Mark talked about a little bit. But really, to truly understand, and this is where the psychological autopsy comes in, and honestly, I've done it more with people who have committed domestic violence, homicide, than looking at law enforcement, because nobody wants to do it. It's a big endeavor. Takes a lot of time. You have to interview not only members of his immediate shift, but members of the hierarchy as well, in order to really come up with the sequence of events that truly go to that place of danger, when they get dark and that terminal event begins. So that would be to look at it in a very systematic way, and to really identify those factors that are meaningful in the immediate 48 hours beforehand.
Hold on.
What are your thoughts on this? I'm a police officer. I've had officers anecdotally tell me that essentially they're kind of fed up, going back with the cumulative trauma. However, they don't have any other life skills, meaning they're not plumbers, they're not carpenters. So they get the sense of feeling trapped. So they don't want to go to work. They recognize, maybe I shouldn't do this job anymore, but I effectively cannot quit because I don't know anything else to do. What are your thoughts on that?
You're stealing part of my presentation. No, I've asked many of them. I said, look, guy, you got to get the hell out of here. Yeah, but I've been on 12 years. I only have to do so many more. Massachusetts, we have to do, 32 years? I think 32 years of doing this stuff. And I said, what else can you do? Nothing. I was in the Army. Boom, I can shoot a gun. Here I am. There's nothing else. I have had a few people over the 40 years I've been doing this who said, I'm a good carpenter, I could become an electrician or something and have left, but most of the time, I agree with you. They're stuck, and they're just trying to make it till they get either a 72% disability retirement, or they can get out the door. Absolutely.
That's something I struggled with when I was going through my worst was, maybe I should just quit. Maybe this job isn't for me anymore, or something to that effect. But then I look back at my career prior to being a cop, there was nothing to brag about by any means. I mean, I pumped gas, I worked at a McDonald's, So I felt I had no skills to do anything else. So when I got better, for lack of a better word, I said I just got to ride this out to my retirement. And it was peaks and valleys. And when I decided to take my early retirement, it was definitely a blessing in disguise by all means. So, but I get what you're saying, because I was like, well, I really don't know what to do. I'm not a fix-it guy. I was very proud of myself the other day. I changed my wife's headlight in her car. It took me 2 hours on YouTube, but I got it. I was very proud of myself. So.
I had a guy tell me, he says, if anybody comes in your office, ask how it is to be a police officer. And he gave me this it's like a monk bent over like this. He said, that's how you feel after 20 years. He said, the first 1 to 5 years, you want the cruiser nice and clean and everything else. He says, years 6 to about 12, you just kick the Dunkin' Donuts cups out of the cruiser and say, the hell with it, and then after that, you hang on to get the hell out of there. That was his summary. He was going out on a disability time.
I think that this new generation of police officers, that are much younger than I am, certainly, and probably you, are going to be the healthiest ones that we've had, physically and psychologically, I hope. I'm pretty optimistic just in seeing some officers that their resilience the resilience of some of these guys. Now this is, again, they're new, squeaky clean, and you don't know what's going to happen over time. But we're hoping that things will be built into their careers that are going to afford them the opportunity to recharge their batteries and to kind of find their homeostasis again and get some balance rather than always being on edge. Gil Martin talks about hypervigilance and so forth. Dr. Polizotti talks about embitterment, and you cannot walk around being hypervigilant or embittered all the time. It just makes for a short life. And then the University of Buffalo came up with the study that says that police officers live 7 years or more less than the average person. I think somebody spoke about that. It seems like it's true, both men and women.
We have a question, and just a reminder, everyone please speak into the microphone.
I'd like to ask the panel, am I coming out? I'd like to ask the panel, what are your thoughts about mental health well-being checks for police officers on an ongoing basis, and perhaps policing being one of those careers where it may need to terminate earlier than going 20, 25 years?
I want to say something very quickly, because I often have this debate with Dr. Daniels, and we talk about like these high intensity careers, right? Like football players, they're not playing football till they're 45, 50 years old, right? All the traumatic injuries to the brain, they don't last that long. And I always wondered, is policing one of those high impact intensity careers that after